interest rates as of today is high. The whole essence of that is to curb inflation. But by the time we are able to achieve the recapitalization in the next 2 years, because the program is a 2-year program, we expect that the interest rate set by the CBN will have come down to a reasonable figure.
Welcome everybody, and welcome to the Anderson chat room, where we discuss all things relating to doing business in Nigeria.
In March 2024, the Central Bank of Nigeria released a regulation increasing the minimum capital threshold for banks. Their rationale for doing this, or their reason for doing this, is due to the different macroeconomic challenges that we're currently facing in the economy, and to move the economy to a $1 trillion economy in 2030. I am your host, Amaka Samoyani, and with me today is Mayowa Salami. He is an associate director in the business advisory unit in Anderson, Nigeria, with 13 years experience advising different companies in different sectors. Welcome, Mayowa, to the chat room.
Thank you very much, Amaka. Thank you.
Can you give us a brief overview of the proposed capitalization?
Right. So the recapitalization program started off in March 2024. So the CBN came in March 2024 to say that they would like to recapitalize the banks. So right now in Nigeria, we have different types of banks. We have the commercial banks, we have the merchant banks, we have the non-interest banks, right? And so the essence of the recapitalization, like you mentioned in your introduction, is to improve the capital base of the bank. So for commercial banks especially, we're looking at taking the capital base from 50 billion to 200 billion, right? And the whole essence of this is to make the bank stronger and more resilient to the current economic conditions that we have, and also to support the economy in achieving the $1 trillion mark that's been set by the president by 2030. So basically, in a nutshell, that's what the CBN intends to do.
So do you think that, looking at our current trajectory, that we're going to get there, considering that, IMF said Nigeria's economy was about 357 million as at 2023. So do you think we're going to get there with this, recapitalization?
Well, it's a big question, to be honest, because as of today, like you rightly said, we're about 3,753 thereabout, and this is 2024. To achieve $1 trillion by 2030, that means you need to have a double-digit growth rate. Currently, Nigeria is doing 3% per annum. So for us to really achieve that, there's a lot of I'll call exponential growth that needs to happen. So we have to have growth in infrastructure. You have to have growth in different phases of the economy. And I think what the CBN is trying to do to actually achieve that, is to really strengthen the banks. One thing is, in any economy, is the financial sector that drives growth. And for us to achieve that GDP growth rate by 2030, you need to have the banks be able to drive the economy, be able to support businesses, to be able to support infrastructure, to be able to support all different sectors. So the call by the CBN to improve the capital base, I think, is a call in the right direction, and that will help to definitely to drive the economy in achieving that $1 trillion in 2030. It's all of that, but I think it's possible.
Okay, so I think you talked about the minimum threshold now being 10 billion.
So the minimum threshold for commercial banks is 200 billion.
200 billion?
Yes, from 50 billion when we had the last recapitalization in 2010.
Wow.
Yes.
And how do they compute the minimum threshold? How are banks expected to compute it?
Okay, so there is no defined or cast in stone calculation, but I think it all depends on what the central bank wants to achieve, right? Now, in this current recapitalization program that we have, the central bank is saying that for the minimum threshold, it's only going to be your share capital and your share premium. Now, if you look at a typical company or a bank as well, you have what you call the capital, the premium, and the retained earnings. Now, your retained earnings is more often than not probably your reserves or the profits brought forward or things like that. But in this particular situation, what the central bank has done is to exclude the retained earnings. And the reason for that is because they need fresh capital to come into the banking sector in order to support the growth objective that they want to achieve in the economy, right? If you don't take out that retained capital as of today, majority of the banks have actually exceeded the threshold. So it all depends on what is the objective and what does the central bank want to achieve. And what the central bank really wants to achieve is to really show up the capital of the banks and make them resilient to any shocks that will happen. So the shocks that will happen, you have the liquidity, to sustain any future shocks. And you have the liquidity to generate what we call risk assets, which is basically loans that you extend to other sectors in order for them to perform and in order for them to also grow in various businesses as well.
Okay, so considering that companies, they consider retained earnings as a major part of their capital, how do you expect, or what do you see companies will face? What kind of challenges do you see companies will face as a result of, where are they supposed to basically get the money from?
Exactly. I think I read the question from you. So, like I said, it's all order, taking out the retained earnings, but the objective is basically to show up the capital. Now, there are several ways the bank can actually raise this capital, right? I will just give a couple. First, so they are currently shareholders, so the existing shareholders can raise the capital without rights issues. If it is not sufficient, then you can go to the stock exchange markets to see if you can open it up to the public as well. Then we have what we call private placements, where you have institutional investors bringing capital, the equity that is required. These institutional investors could be either PE firms, it could be other strategic investors or other international investors. So it's probably a good time for players outside Nigeria to come into the Nigerian banking system and also invest. And the last option, not necessarily last, another option to consider is M&A. If we could recall, in 2010, we had about 80 to 90 banks.
Yes.
And when they then Governor Central Bank, I think Soludo came with recapitalization, it all collapsed to about less than 25 banks.
Right.
So we see that happening in this current session of recapitalization. Currently, we have about 26 banks across different strata, and definitely with the M&A, it's going to happen again. So for the banks that do not have the capital to meet the minimum threshold, M&A is an option for them, not just an acquisition.
Okay. So final question, do you think, because you had talked about the fact that the idea of the recapitalization is to give banks more funding, right? To give loans to industries, I guess, to boost the activity, of this industry. Do you see this recapitalization achieving that?
Yeah. So the money from the banks, once the recapitalization happens, so the banks become more liquid, right? They extend this money to the different sectors of the economy, and by extending the money to different sectors of the economy, you've given them the capital required for them to also grow their businesses, right? And all of this have its own what we call a spiral effect. So first of the banks are now have enough capital to lend to the economy. The economy now has enough capital to grow in different aspects. So you look at the SMEs, you look at the consumer markets, look at the manufacturing companies. These will now have the capital to now expand their business. And invariably, we're already getting to achieving that $1 trillion milestone that we've set for ourselves. If we look at the total objective, interest rates, as of today, is high. The whole essence of that is to curb inflation. But by the time we are able to achieve the recapitalization in the next 2 years, because the program is a 2-year program, we expect that the interest rate set by the CPN will have come down to a reasonable figure, right? And the general masses will now will be encouraged to go to the banks and get the money that the banks are able to raise, basically.
All right, thank you, Mayowa, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining the Anderson chat room. See you next time.